to the table of mercy, prepared with the wine and the bread.
Welcome to Come to the Table. My name is John Mark Hicks. In our last episode, we looked at the ministry of Jesus, and now we want to go to another moment in the ministry of Jesus, the moment that probably most of us are quite aware of and are familiar with, and that is the Last Supper. The last time Jesus ate with his disciples, the last Passover Jesus ate with his disciples before his death. And this is a really significant moment, as we're probably aware. We call it the institution of the Lord's Supper, is typically how we refer to it. And I want to use Luke chapter 22 as our launching pad, as the place where we want to sit in and reflect on what happened in this moment. Now, one of the things we need to remember about Passover is that it was not a sad moment. I know sometimes we tend to think that way, right? Because we all have this Charlton Heston Ten Commandments thing in our head that, when the Passover happened, everybody was sad. You hear all this wailing outside the door, and people are dying, but people are being saved too. Passover was not a sad moment. It was a liberating moment. It was the moment when Israel was liberated, and at that Passover, Israel experienced liberation. And they left their houses and crossed the Red Sea and went to Sinai because of the Passover event. And when Israel celebrated the Passover, they remembered that story and they rehearsed that story. And when they remembered it and rehearsed it, they didn't do it with sadness. They didn't do it with gloom. They did it with thanksgiving and with celebration and great joy. Remember that text in 2 Chronicles chapter 30 we talked about earlier. It was a Passover celebration. And over again in that text, it talked about how the people rejoiced in that moment. Because this is about liberation, about freedom. Freedom from bondage and from slavery. When we come to the Passover text here in Luke chapter 22, we need to remember that. We need to have that kind of context to it, of a joyous celebration. It's in that context that Jesus reclines at the table with them, and he picks up the cup. Yeah, that's right. In Luke, he picks up the cup first. And he says, I'm not going to drink this again with you until the kingdom of God comes. Or I have really wanted to eat this Passover with you, and I will not eat it again until the Passover is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. And as soon as he says stuff like that, the disciples no doubt are getting kind of excited. They're saying, whoa, this is the last Passover before the kingdom comes. That means the kingdom's right around the corner. And they start arguing about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. See, the kingdom's good news. The coming of the kingdom is good news. It's something to celebrate. And the disciples argue about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom because they envision this hierarchy and this reign and this power. And Jesus says, that's not what it's about. Not about that. Because then Jesus took the bread and he said, he took the bread and he gave thanks. He blessed God for it. And then he broke it and he gave it to them. And he said, this is my body, which is given for you. Now, listen to that language for a moment. We've heard it so often that it kind of just can go right over our head. I want you to hear the word given. This is a gift. I'm going to give you a gift. This bread is a gift. It's for you. I'm doing this for you. It's about you. It's how I want you, how I desire you, how I want to nourish you and commune with you and share with you. And so I'm going to give my body for you. And this bread is my body. Now the word is tricky. And there's been a lot of debate in Christian theology about the meaning of the word is. And I want to talk more about that, but maybe in our next episode we'll talk more about that word is. But I think the point here that we need to really grab hold of is that God in Jesus Christ is giving us life. That this bread is about life. It's about nourishment. It's not about, hey, this body is, I'm dying for you and now we all need to be sad. This is, I'm going to give you a gift and it's life. Eat it. Be nourished. Enjoy. Commune. Not eat it and be sad. It's eat it and live. Because this is given for you. And then he takes the cup. He says, this is my blood. This is the blood of the new covenant, which is language from Jeremiah 31. Or this is the blood of the covenant, which is language from Exodus 24. This is the blood of the covenant, which is poured out for you. For you. And blood here is not about being sad about the death of Jesus. It's about blood brings life. This is a life given for you so that you might have life. To enjoy this relationship with God. I'm going to lay myself on the altar so that you can be at the table and eat the bread and drink the cup. Jesus is certainly referring to the altar. I'm going to pour out my blood. I'm going to give my body. And the altar is important because there's no table without the altar. But when you eat and drink this, you're not at the altar anymore. When you eat and drink this, you're at the table. And when you eat and drink it, you remember. And when we think about remember, we tend to think of something very cognitive, like, oh, we got to get in our head to think about the past. But in Israel, remember is more than just cognition. It's about seeing God. It's about remembering. It's about re-experiencing. It's about encountering. It's about bringing the past into the present so that we experience the present now. And that we enjoy this table because at the table, remember Paul, consider Israel. Those who eat the sacrifices, participate in the altar, have communion with. This is about communion. And it's about communion with the altar. Communion between God and humanity because of what Jesus has done. So in one sense, we can say Jesus is on the table. This is my body and this is my blood. We want to be careful that we don't take all the meaning of the word is out of is, right? There's something that connects us to Jesus Christ through the bread and the cup. Jesus is in some sense on the table. But Jesus is also at the table. Jesus is hosting this table. And He intends for this table to be a certain kind of place, a particular way of experiencing God and experiencing the communion between Jesus and the people of God. And so when the disciples kind of break out in argument, which that's hard to imagine, isn't it? People arguing over the Lord's Supper. I mean, that's never happened before. But it has happened all the time. And here it's about greatness. Who's going to be the greatest? Who's going to be most important in the kingdom? What kind of hierarchy are we going to have? Who's going to get to sit at the table? Who's going to be able to sit at that place at the table? Who's going to be most prominent at the table? Who's going to get to serve the table? Right? Jesus says, this is not that kind of table. The table you're talking about is what you find over in politics and in nations and kingdoms and how they arrange everything in hierarchies and who's most important and who's the benefactor and who gets the credit. That's not our kind of table. I mean, Jesus says, look at me. I mean, I'm at this table, right? Who's the host of this table? And Jesus, well, you are. You're the master. But I am among you as one who serves. Remember in John 13 what Jesus did at that table? He washed feet. And now he is among them as one who serves. Now, he may mean by that he actually served the table. Maybe he served the food. I don't know. We don't know for sure. But what Jesus is saying is, I am here as a servant. And if you have any doubt, this is my body given for you. That's the kind of table this is. This is a self-giving table. This is the table that says, I'm going to give myself for you. And when we sit at that table and we turn it into some kind of hierarchy, some kind of esteem, or some kind of who's most important, Jesus says, you don't understand the gospel. Because the gospel is, this is my body given for you. I am among you as one who serves. I have given you my body and blood. Now you give to each other your body and blood. You give to each other as I have given to you. You serve each other as I have served you. There was one occasion when I was talking about this to a church, and I clearly remember seeing it. On the second row was this single man sitting on one end of the row, and there was a single woman sitting on the other end of the row. And what I asked the church to do that day was, when they took the bread and they passed it to the person next to them, to say, I am your servant. Doesn't seem like a hard thing, unless you mean it. All right? And I watched. That man got up and walked down the row and served the woman on the end and said, I am your servant. I got a note from the preacher of that congregation about 2 years later and said, you don't know what happened that day, do you? And how this man had recently come to the preacher to describe what had happened. I didn't know it, but those were two people who had divorced each other. They still went to the same church, they still sat on the same row, but they were divorced. And it was not a pleasant divorce. When he served her that day, something happened. They didn't get remarried, but somehow the animosity went away. And there was a reconciliation. When we eat together at the table of the Lord and we serve each other as Christ has served us, it changes what happens at the table. So the next time you serve someone that bread and you pass it down the aisle or whatever arrangement you might use, say to that person, I am your servant. And then we can commit ourselves to try to live up to that promise. Because just as Jesus became bread for us, so we who eat the bread become bread for the world. We become the servants of the world, just as Christ served us.